Welcome to Birken Forest Monastery's live stream, questions and answers. I am Ajahn Sona. Feel free to put questions in the bar beside the what is it called? Chat bar. Yes, let's have the first question, Pia.
Ajahn, our first question is from the live chat from Gatikara. Dear Ajahn, when one is free of the hindrances, then oftentimes a light joy arises. However, Passadhi can also arise when the hindrances are absent. What determines when the hindrances are absent, whether we will experience joy or tranquility?
There's two ways. One is that it's voluntary. If you're quite adept at this, you know your way to the cessation of the hindrances, the 5 hindrances of greed, anger, sloth and torpor, agitation, and worry and flurry, and skeptical doubt. These are the 5 hindrances. When they subside, assuming that you're conscious, because they could be subsiding in sleep, the mind is now unharassed and is in a preparatory condition for the arising of its nature when it is not being harassed by the hindrances. And joy is one of the characteristic emotions that one feels. One could pass quickly into serenity after joy. Or one could actually voluntarily just decide to go directly to serenity or even deeper samadhi states. But for a person, when it's not voluntary, it would just be the residual mental states that were available to you at the time, depending on your various activities, what was going on in your life at the time. Joy is an earlier stage, really, than the serenity, the Passadhi. You'll see this in the 7 factors of enlightenment in the order that they're placed in. Mindfulness, investigation of Dhamma, energy, joy, and then Passadhi, the tranquility. So you see that it's the first 4 are quite active. Mindfulness, investigation, energy, and joy. And then it begins to subside into a deeper, more serene and still. Then Passadhi, or serenity, samadhi, concentration, and then finally into this deep equanimity, upekkha. So that's the natural order of things. And in your life, just your ordinary life also, if you have vigorous activity that you're enjoying, you play a sport or something like this, or you go out and garden for a while, there's a physical and joyful effort. And then when you go up on the porch and look over your gardening, you feel serene after the joy and energy. Serenity follows that. So depending for the person who is not really an adept at this, that it will just naturally occur depending on what you were doing earlier in the day, perhaps the mind states that you had earlier in the day, whether joy or serenity arises. But if you're practiced, then you choose the state, and you can go directly to it. Okay, let's go on to our next question.
The next question is from Chloe in Portland, Oregon, United States. Is it possible to get physically sick from old karma coming up after intensive meditation practice? I'm referring to old suppressed memories. The more I practice breath meditation, the more I seem to be able to access unresolved issues and notice previously unconscious motivations for my actions.
Yes, and it's quite common. You can pretty well be prepared for strong memories that have being suppressed. Usually, this idea of suppression and repression and so forth, you'll hear these terms in Freudian type of psychology and so forth. By the way, I don't give a lot of credit to Freud for accuracy in any of this stuff, but quite often we're not aware of why we do things. We're busy, we're distracting ourselves. And in the case of like substantial trauma in life and difficult memories, the reason why we're so busy and distracting ourselves, or perhaps even indulging in drugs and alcohol, is that the memories are threatening and difficult. And so we try to avoid them by redirecting our attention outward into activities. So you'll see people obsessively doing everything from free climbing cliffs and marathoning and to knitting forever and this kind of stuff. Just being busy. Quite often it's a way of just avoiding problematic thoughts that might arise. So when you sit down to meditate, there's nowhere to run, and these things rise. I frequently have people when they come to the monastery as guests, this is lay people, and they're staying for an extended period of time and meditating. They often report some surprising nightmares as well. And they're rather surprised. They were here on a loving kindness retreat or something, and they're having nightmares. And when I first heard this, I thought, this is interesting. Maybe the place is haunted or something. But then I realized, actually, the monasteries, and especially in a retreat monastery, it's a safe place. The mind knows this. And it allows perhaps repressed memories to rise because it's a safe place and you can actually deal with it. And the mind is saying, I've been keeping this from you because I don't think you can handle it, but now you're in a good, serene, and safe space. If you don't deal with this now, when are you going to deal with it? So the deeper mind releases that up. It may be during the meditation, it may be during sleep, and it may be in the dream form and so forth. But this is very, very common. And sometimes, you'll see people in meditation retreats silently weeping in the back of the room or in the front of the room, whatever. And they report the upwelling of memories that have not been dealt with, etc. So this is very common, very common. And that's, in some ways, that's perhaps the reason why people avoid meditation, avoid going to these meditation retreats. Something about it tells them that they don't want to deal with it. And without distraction, they'll have to deal with it. The way we process this, it's not valuable in itself, though. This is not psychotherapy, as in analyzing those situations, going into them and reliving them and all that kind of stuff. That's more or less Freudian or old school psychotherapy, perhaps. Meditation is to get the ability the space to recognize these as unbidden thoughts and to reframe the situations that took place in the framework of the Buddha's philosophy of reality. That such things happen, that the world around you is out of your control, and you end up as a vulnerable person. You're subject to all kinds of violence, sickness, emotional abuse, and all this. And this is reality, and it happens. And what we need to know is how to deal with it. What is the attitude we need to deal with this? If it occurred in the past, or it's about to occur, or it's going to occur at some time in the future, we need tactics and attitudes that allow us not to be overwhelmed or traumatized by these things. But it's not by investigation the details of the event. It's primarily by having a philosophy of life which allows for this unwanted suffering that is inflicted upon us, and yet it doesn't traumatize us psychologically. We can free ourselves from this. We can release ourselves from this. So this is the process of meditation. This is what meditation is really getting at, the deep practice of it. If you're doing this by yourself, you may feel a little lost. It's quite often nice to go and talk to a calm and experienced person, the monk or layperson who's guiding the retreat, etc., to have some restore your confidence that you can face these things, release these things, etc., and gain strength in the midst of this. Okay, let's go on to the next question.
Our next question is from the live chat from Emperor Palpatine, my apologies, from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. Nibbana is the end of suffering, but in some suttas it's talked about in a very different manner, like a realm where there is neither this world nor another, an element, cessation of consciousness, etc. What is the connection between all these different things? Why are they all referred to as Nibbana?
Yeah, this is a point which has been discussed over the millennia in the commentaries, etc. So there are two types of Nibbana. One is that which occurs to a living being while they're alive, and this is the Arahant, the fully enlightened person. And in that case, it's the cessation of greed, hatred, and delusion has ceased for that person. The inner volitions of greed, hatred, and delusion have completely ceased. They've uprooted the causes of those things. What remains for them are the seven factors of enlightenment, which constitute the enlightened mind. There are other elements to it. You know, there's a sophisticated teaching called the Abhidhamma, which lists the types of consciousness that can occur in the enlightened mind. But that's more or less easier to understand. So this is Nibbana, meaning the cessation, the cooling off, this complete evaporation of greed, hatred, and delusion, and psychological suffering in brief. And then there's the question, which was, of course, asked to the Buddha on several occasions, well, what happens to that person when they die? Because Buddhism has a cosmology or a belief structure of rebirth, you know. One journeys around in samsara until such time as one is released through full enlightenment. And in this case, this has been achieved, and then what? Then what happens? Does that person continue on? Do they exist? Or do they cease? What? And the Buddha is maddeningly rejecting all of the possibilities. He says either that the person saying that the person exists, does not exist, neither exists nor not exists, both exists and does not exist. All of these four possibilities are not applicable. Usually it's explained as that the reference to a person is the problem at the root of this, since the Buddha points out that there is no real self. That is a self which travels through time unchanged. There is only the changing elements of the person, five aspects of the person, you know. The body, consciousness, perception, volition, and feelings. This is what constitutes a person, and these are all subject to continuous flow and change. There is no atomic monad which is the real self in the middle of all of this stuff. So this is, now what is this pari-nibbana? So the death of an arahant is called pari-nibbana, final nibbana. And what is it? And here is where there are schools. So some would insist that it's clearly expressed by the Buddha that it's the utter and final cessation of the 5 khandhas, the 5 aspects which I just listed, which constitute a being. They completely cease. And that there is nothing outside of the khandhas or within the khandhas that is not being described within those. And so those who hold that attitude would say that it's very clear that the Buddha is a complete cessation. It's the final nibbana, the final going out of the energies that drive one through samsara. And there is no indication of a further realm. Others would say that, but there's language used in the suttas which seem to indicate there's some sort of quite impossible to express sort of something or other. One of the similes is that the Buddha talks about, well, you know, when a light is shone on a wall, you see the light. But what if the wall falls down and it just shines into space? You don't see it, but what happens to the light in that case? So that might be a simile for pari-nibbana. So some would hold that. This is a long debate in the more or less in the commentarial tradition. What is this? So various monks hold one of these 2 views. Some say, look, it's just over. All of the similes, you know, it's very clear that the 5 khandhas, the 5 aspects of human, are all that there is. There is nothing beyond that, nothing outside of it, nothing inside of it. And when they cease, they cease. And then others say, but there's a kind of a rather positive type of language around this, the pari-nibbana, this thing in itself. So they sometimes refer to Nibbana as a dhatu, or an element. It's rather problematic, though. I don't think that by conventional logic you can make much sense of it. And this is one of the reasons why the Buddha did not... He regularly would say, Nibbana is beyond normative speech. There is nothing within speech which can quite capture this situation. And this kind of realization is quite modern. There's a whole school of philosophy in the 20th century which talks about philosophy as just usually a misunderstanding of the meaning of words, that certain problems in philosophy are really just problems in language, thinking that words are saying something when they're not saying anything. So this is kind of along those lines, that it's a problem. There is no way to express this in any better way. So the Buddha doesn't. So I hope I have been helpful in this. I'm sure I leave you with the same questions, the same inability to resolve the situation that you started with at the beginning of my explanation. Because really, I think to make an easy answer to this, to be very positive and assertive about it, is to go beyond what logic can possibly do. And I'm afraid we have to be realistic about this and humble about this, that when you look at the explanations of the khandhas as everything and then ceasing, and then you supply a an alternative explanation that somehow there's another type of consciousness, the Nibbanic consciousness, which is not part of the five khandhas, which the Buddha meant, but he didn't say explicitly, but it must be that way. I think it's just trying too hard. I think in the end, I guess we must wait to find out. And the only way to find out is to become an arahant. So I will leave you with that. I'm happy to be not on either side of the argument. I'm happy to just allow certain things to be inexpressible and to be content with that, and nevertheless to have a lot of faith in the progress towards enlightenment. Okay, let's go on. Next question.
Our next question is from Upasaka Peter in Tacoma Park, Maryland, United States. Dear Ajahn, a Buddhist friend of mine in South America lives in an urban neighborhood with extreme violence. She can't move to a safer area due to economics. She has a daily meditation practice, an ongoing Dhamma study, reflection. She asked me, any suggestions how to practice tranquility, the fifth factor of enlightenment, when violence is all around? I told her I would ask you. Thank you for any guidance for her and others living amidst violence.
Well, I think she has to if she can't get out of it, she has to get into it. I really would advise her to get out. But sometimes you can't. You get thrown in jail sometimes, and you get into a war zone sometimes. It'd be nice to get out, but you can't. So if you're stuck in it, then you just have to work through the careful reasoning that fear and anxiety makes it much worse, and that refusing fear and anxiety increases your clarity and good judgment. And you need clarity and good judgment. The more dangerous and problematic the situation is, the more clear and lucid and intelligent you need to be. So you really can't, because the situation is dangerous, you really can't afford emotions like fear and anxiety and even grief. You really can't afford them. Your well-being and survival really depends on cool, clear mind. And your emotional survival depends on the warmth of the heart. So there's lots of beings in the world that are not violent, not trying to rob you or kill you. And you can rejoice with them in that, and you can feel warmth for that. And that's the best state of mind. The Buddha frequently reminds the monks to keep practicing loving kindness in the midst of violence and so forth. He gives a very graphic story of a time. I believe it's in a previous life. The Buddha recalls a previous life when he was practicing as a yogi in the forest, alone in the forest, and bandits came across him. And he was practicing loving kindness at the time. And so the bandits said, what are you doing? They found this impoverished yogi in the forest living on berries and so forth. And they were rough characters. And he said, well, I'm just living here alone and practicing loving kindness. So they said, oh yeah, sure, well, we'll find out how much loving kindness you have. They decided to saw his limbs off with a saw. So in the midst of, he said, they sawed my feet and my arms off. And during that time, monks, I did not allow a single thought of ill will to arise. Monks, if bandits get you and saw your limbs off and you produce ill will towards them, you are not my sons. That's a radical situation, isn't it? Not just, it's torture, murder. And even in those situations, the true child of the Buddha does not generate ill will. I mean, is that a terrible thing to impose on a person? No, I think because both ill will and fear are extra punishments. You're already getting your limbs sawed off. That's bad enough. You don't want to add more psychological distress to that. After all, of course, it occurs frequently in human life that people have to have limbs removed, amputations and so forth. And how does it help to have fear and anger about the matter, or why me and all that kind of stuff? We have this fragile, vulnerable body. A lot of beings are antagonistic towards us. No matter who you are on the planet, somebody wants to kill you. And so this is the nature of reality, and we have to decide, well, what kind of emotions do we want in the midst of this? We have to get very realistic. This is the way it is, and how shall I feel about this? What is the best way to feel about this? So the Buddha gives these, serenity and clarity and loving kindness is the best response to this. So that's a little discussion of that. Yeah. Let's go on, Pia. Next question.
The next question is from the live chat from Chris in Fairview, Oregon, United States. Dear Ajahn Sona, for the past few months I've been experiencing a blinking-like involuntary facial movement during the out-breath. I've heard these are called kriyas. Are there skillful ways to work with this? It's very distracting, but with enough effort it eventually calms into stillness.
Yeah, I don't think we need to introduce a Sanskrit word for a tic. Lots of people have these facial tics, blinking eyes, twitches of the mouth, facial twitches, and so forth. They're usually connected with kind of stress that has been unresolved. And so that's why it ceases as you become more serene, the facial twitching and tics cease. So you want to examine in your life, like, what am I unconsciously creating stress within myself, and I need to stop doing that. My facial response is telling me that I am doing this. So you become more conscious of stress. And a lot of people rationalize their stress. They say, well, I'm in a stressful situation. How can I not be stressed? Well, again, it's like the previous question. You can be in a violent neighborhood. The best strategy is not to be stressed. A demanding job, a demanding social situation, demanding domestic situation, the best response is always not stress, tension, fear, but calm and goodwill for yourself, at least. And this is the way to overcome these things. Yeah. I wouldn't make it too mystical or bring in a lot of yoga for this. This is quite a common thing. And of course, you'll see this in twitching. The whole body can twitch. In meditation, sometimes the whole body twitches very clearly, that people are releasing kind of energies and so forth. It's not all that mysterious. It's nature of the human mind. And the cure for it is meditation and serenity, etc. Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the next question.
The next question is from Upasaka Kema in San Diego, California, United States. Dear Ajahn Sona, in the Dhamma we learn ethical wholesomeness is the only way to dissolve our attachment to existence. It seems to imply the universe has some kind of ethical foundation. It almost begs us to believe there could be some loving impersonal power in it. I'm puzzled by this. Why is it that an ethical consciousness produces such wonderful beings and conditions?
Well, that's kind of implying God is through the universe or something like that. We don't really need to do that. I mean, because although it's there's ethics and so forth, there's also a lot of suffering. So how do we explain, if this is the result of a universal consciousness, how do we explain away evil and suffering? So the Buddha didn't attribute sort of creation to a God or the pervasiveness of God throughout the universe. He just said, though, that in terms of consciousness, there is, consciousness is the universe, is an aspect of the universe. Every aspect of a human is just an aspect of the universe, isn't it? The body is made out of the basic elements of material, isn't it? It's not something else. You're not a visitor in this universe. You're not from some other universe. You are this universe. This universe is you manifesting. It's what a universe does. It peoples. Peoples and animals and plants itself. And so these ethics and positive emotions are the universe experiencing these in the form of a human or an animal, whatever. These are really not separate. You can't separate these things as if they stood outside of the universe. So yes, there are obviously laws of cause and effect in the moral domain, and you can't have a free, light, blissful kind of consciousness if you don't understand the causes for this. And various cultures acknowledge that there must be some sort of true ethical standard. It's not. There are philosophers that hold everything is just relative. It's just this society around you decides what's good and bad, and it's all just arbitrary. Really, there's no ultimate basis for this. It's just relative. The Buddha would not agree with that whatsoever. There are, of course, little social differences of how to do things. You know, how do you cook rice in one culture and in the other, and it's just a cultural thing. But the primary ethical attitude of behavior not based on greed, hatred, and delusion, but speech and behavior based on generosity, kindness, and clarity will produce a much finer experience of existence than an existence that is based on greed, hatred, and delusion. There's intrinsic suffering in that, and it's not avoidable. It's not somebody can't be angry and free and peaceful at the same time. Can't be stingy and the expansive sense of generosity at the same time. They can't be confused and darkened and lucid at the same time. So the Buddha just points this out. It's you don't have to bring the universe into it. You just bring consciousness into it, and this is the way consciousness works within this universe. So it explains that Buddhism doesn't feel that it's just a social thing, that it's just appropriate for some people. It applies to all beings in all situations. That greed, hatred, and delusion are problematic and lead to suffering, and generosity, kindness, and clarity lead to reduction of suffering and the experience of these wonderful traits, which with other beings also appreciate, especially other wise beings. Yeah. Okay. Next question.
Next question is from a live chat from Alan. Every time we have an experience of the deathless, some fetters are cut. Can the fetters be cut, quote, manually, or is the experience of the deathless what cuts the fetters?
Yeah, a little explanation around this. Some of you listening are quite familiar with these terms, the fetters, in Pali that's samyojanas. These are the kind of chains that bind us, and they have roots, greed, hostility, confusion, conceit, restlessness, ignorance are the basic fetters. And they are just intrinsic to humans unless they're enlightened. And they are dormant sometimes, but they're always there, and sometimes they're active. In their active form, we usually talk about them as the hindrances. When greed is active, it's called a hindrance, but it's the potential for greed is there. When anger is active, it's the hindrance of anger, and when it's dormant, latent, it's one of the fetters or samyojanas. So it's like weeds that keep growing back. You cut them down and they just keep growing back because the roots are in the ground. Yeah. Until they're completely uprooted, they will grow back. And the only way to uproot them ultimately is by wisdom, understanding. But it is also very helpful to not activate them. And you can do this by serenity practices, by loving kindness practices, by removing yourself from environments that are provoking you into these negative responses. This helps. The inactivity of the fetters weakens them. And the Buddha gives a simile that as a rope left on the beach. So when a rope is, like a natural fiber rope is left on the beach, at first, if you pick it up and it's 1 inch in diameter, you can't break it. There's no possibility of breaking it. But if you leave it there and wind and rain and sun affect it over time, each fiber is weakened. And then one day you can go to the beach and you pick this rope up, which is 1 inch in diameter. It looks very strong. It's been weakened and it just breaks easily in your hand. This is the subtle effect of meditation, of having a sense of virtue, of following the precepts which give you are the outward representation of virtue, practicing the positive emotions, loving kindness, generosity, kindness, and listening to Dhamma, so forth. These are all weakening the fetters until they can actually be broken by a moment of clarity. Other than that, they can only be suppressed. So when you say, is there a physical way to do this? Well, even if I put you in an extended coma for a period of time, you won't be manifesting greed, hatred, or delusion, but you won't be weakening the fibers either. You'll just be in suspended structure. Drugs sometimes temporarily weaken these things, but they don't weaken they create more problems, so that you can't do it that way. You need to weaken them through methodical practice of mindfulness and reflecting on what are negative emotions, what are positive emotions, and bringing in right effort to remove negative things and to replace them with positive things. This is an area which is quite lacking in the general teachings of mindfulness. In mindfulness, there's quite often this belief that just mere observation fixes everything, but you see this in the Eightfold Path, that right effort is also precedes right mindfulness, and means that there are certain tactics that you must institute towards the things which mindfulness observes, and that this requires effort and informed effort. And this is how eventually the basic fetters are weakened, and eventually they snap, and then you're liberated from them. Okay, next question.
Next question is from Upasaka Jodika from Elmshorn, Deutschland. Are there any differences between Theravada Buddhism in the Thai forest tradition, Burma, and Sri Lanka, and do they treat the ordination of women differently?
Well, yes, the forest tradition is just it is found in all three countries. They're in a minority, by the way. The most of the monks in those three countries are town monks. It's pervasively part of the culture, so many people ordain. In Thailand and in Burma, temporary ordination is very, very common. Sri Lanka has a more a lineage of lifetime ordination, which has been changing in the last, say, 30 or 40 years. There's a more of temporary ordinations taking place. There is cultural histories behind these as well. Of the three countries, Thailand is the only one that was never colonized. Burma and Sri Lanka have had colonial invasions and rulers. They've had the misfortune of the British Empire on them. They've had, Sri Lanka has had the Dutch, the Portuguese, etc. And it was only in the at the time of the liberation of India in 1948 that Sri Lanka also became returned to its own state of an independent country. So they have also had an interrupted culture, etc. Thailand has managed to not be colonized. Of all the Asian countries, I think it's one of the, maybe perhaps the only one that hasn't been colonized. And they have I would say though that Thailand has a shorter history of the dominance of Theravada Buddhism in it, probably going on back about 1,000 years or so. The earliest temples I've seen in Thailand are around 1000 AD. And Sri Lanka, it goes back to, well, 3rd century BC, theoretically, from history. You can see temples that are pre-Christian. They're 1st century BC. Burma, again, is like Thailand. Theravada Buddhism does not have a lot of architectural monuments that are any later than or earlier than about 1000 AD. All of those three countries had the bhikkhunis, the nuns, were a part of the Sri Lankan culture. The arrival of Buddhism in Sri Lanka is celebrated as the arrival of two monastics. One was a monk and the other one was a nun, Sanghamita. And these were the children of the Emperor Asoka, which were sent to bring Buddhism to Sri Lanka. And so you'll see all kinds of images of bhikkhunis in Sri Lankan architecture and art, where you rarely see any trace of that in Thailand and Burma. And that has to do with the antiquity of when Buddhism arrived in these countries. So it didn't seem that the bhikkhuni order arrived or is not in the national consciousness in Burma and Thailand, but it is still in the Sri Lankan consciousness. And in Sri Lanka, you have quite a number of bhikkhunis that have been ordained. It's perhaps 1,000 now. Some of the Sri Lankan monks were quite sympathetic to the idea of ordination of bhikkhunis, and others were not, because this historically had died out in the 13th century, even in Sri Lanka. The bhikkhuni ordination went to China and so forth and was maintained in the Mahayana traditions, and it flourished and is still flourishing, but not in the Theravada countries. So this is a great issue in modern times, although I'm not sure how much it is on the minds in Thailand or Burma. It's not like in the forefront of things, but especially in the West, the idea of women's ordination is on the front burner, and sometimes people get burnt one way or the other with these issues. So Sri Lanka is perhaps the most sympathetic to the reinvigoration, the restoration of the bhikkhuni order. all kinds of, there's fairly reasonable arguments on both sides about the possibility of restoring the order, why it can't be restored, why it can be restored. I've been involved in this for decades in terms of just trying to sort it out and find out about it. The Thai forest tradition has rejected it to this at the moment, declares that it can't and shouldn't be done. The reinstitution of the Bhikkhuni order, that it has died out and can't be restored by monks. The Burmese seem to be on the same page, that it's not valid and can't be reinstituted. In Thailand and Burma, they have nuns, but they're not called bhikkhunis. And so there's a substitute order in Thailand called the Meithis. And I think there's 10,000 or so Meithis. I have, at our present monastery, there is Meithis Mon, a Thai Meithis, who's been here for more than 20 years. And in Sri Lanka, as I say, there is an order of nuns, but there is a much larger order of what is called Dasa Sila Mata, which was the substitute order for the bhikkhunis. And it has been going since the bhikkhuni order had died out in Sri Lanka. This other order, and they appear as, they're wearing the brown robes. They look like nuns, very similar robes to the monks. And Dasa Sila Mata means 10 precept mother. And they shave their heads and meditate and live in their own monasteries. And there's, I think, about 3,500 Dasa Sila Matas in Sri Lanka. Hard to distinguish them visually from bhikkhunis, but they don't have the extensive rules, the Vinaya rules, that the bhikkhunis would have if they were actually fully ordained. I have visited Sri Lanka, and I have specifically gone and talked to the president of the Dasa Sila Matas Society with Sister Mon, with the Meithis Mon. We wanted to inquire to them what they thought about the bhikkhuni ordination and whether they are about to decide to become bhikkhunis. And she said no, that they're not. And many of them may be in the robes for much of their lives, and they are content with that form. They don't want to switch forms to the bhikkhuni order. Some of their objections were that the numerous rules that bhikkhunis have are hard to follow in this time, and they preferred to not start again, and that they were quite content with their form, etc. So there are others, obviously, in Sri Lanka that do want to be bhikkhunis and have gone forth and had the ordination process taken place. So that's the state of at the moment. In these three countries, as well as I can have kept up with it. Yeah. Okay, next question.
Mm-hmm. Our next question is from the live chat from Michael in Sweden. My question is, do you believe in ADHD, or is it a form of ego identity? I have a big problem with laziness around learning the Dhamma. What are your thoughts? Thank you.
Well, ADHD, I'm going to leave it to the psychologists who coined the term to define it and so forth and give you a test to find out whether you have ADHD. But being lazy and not learning the Dhamma, that's an old category we have in Buddhism. It's called being lazy, unmotivated. And that's very common in many humans. we should, there's a lot of things we should do, but we don't. We don't get around to it and so forth. And I don't think there's anything new about that, and I don't think it's worthy of the name ADHD. I think it's just a lack of sufficient motivation, and this is the case in most people's lives. You know, there's not a vital urgency in most people to pursue this path. They don't see the danger in samsara acutely enough to motivate them. And that's quite common. So that's one of the impediments to the path as well. Yeah. Let's go on to another question. Do we have another question?
We do. The next question is from, one moment, from Westland, from Benjamin in Sweden. Is there free will?
I'm afraid I am compelled to believe so. If there is no free will, I'm predetermined to believe there is. I would moderate it though. That let's talk about what the Buddha thought rather than Ajahn Sona. What the Buddha, I mean, there were philosophers at the time that also felt that everything is completely determined from the get-go, and the Buddha rejected that view. He said, "You are not rigidly predetermined, but there is causality in the mental sphere, but it doesn't mean that you." It means that you can and should make effort. And so it comes down to this: there is the sixth factor of the Eightfold Path is right effort. So obviously, the Buddha believes that you can change your mind and make effort. And he said that's the important thing. These debates about free will and determinism are more or less I don't know whether they reveal the truth about reality, but they reveal that when you exclusively use logic, you run into paradoxes and problems. There are all kinds of interesting logical conundrums which you will take in first-year philosophy logic and will leave you scratching your head. And then eventually, a month later, you will have forgotten about your conclusion that you have no free will and you will be making choices like mad. He's a practical, the Buddha is pragmatic, and he said, you monks, you can make effort. If you could not make effort, I would not say make effort, but because you can make effort, therefore I say, O monks, make effort. So that's the pragmatic solution to this free will and determination. You know, so there are schools of this, and there's lots of logical types, insist there's no free will. And there's good logical reasons. It's very hard to imagine that if your will is free, then you're kind of, decisions arrive out of nothing, right? And so that would be a precarious and kind of strange situation to be in. The Buddha more or less says that you are not predetermined, but you are conditioned. And you can feel this. You try to quit smoking or quit a habit that you have, and you decide that you're going to quit, and then some other aspect of yourself decides that you're not going to quit. And then the next day you decide you're going to quit, and then some aspect of yourself, the conditioned aspect, says, no, you're going to keep doing that. So we can feel directly that we are conditioned. But we also have a sense that you can undo some of these conditioning and change your condition and go in a new direction. Lots of people report this. The school that is very great advocate of free will is existentialism, at least sort of the French existentialists like Jean-Paul Sartre. He is really big on free will. And the argument he makes is this: until you can predict everything that's going to happen, you cannot prove that you are determined. And you can't predict your own behavior. You cannot predict who you're going to be tomorrow. Sometimes you can't predict who you're going to be in 5 minutes. You think, I'm not an angry kind of person. Then somebody does something and you blow up at them. You say, see? Now, until you, like in a physics, you can predict, you can say, I know the speed that apple that I'm going to drop will go, because physics are rigidly determined, and there are rigid laws, and I will predict it, and it will happen. But when we come to something like psychology, we can predict all you want, but you will have very great difficulty in showing that you can predict behavior in humans. And so that's his argument why, and for him, it's actually, it's an existential problem. The radical freedom that you have is what makes you anxious, according to him. You are anxious because you don't know what you're going to do tomorrow. He gives an example. You go, you go to a party, and it's held in an apartment on the 20th floor, and they have a nice balcony on the 20th floor apartment. You go out there, get some fresh air, you're having a little talk, and somebody's leaning on the rail, looking over. You go and lean on the rail, look over, and then you get an odd feeling like, what if I jumped off? I wouldn't want to do that. I think I'll go inside. Why would you have such a thought that you perfectly know that you're not going to jump off the balcony, are you? But it's a long ways down. It would be a terrible thing if you did. And there's part of you that doesn't really trust yourself that you're not going to do that. So he gives that as an example of like free will. Like, you don't know who you're going to be in the next minute or so. You maybe have changed your mind and decided to jump off. So this is why you feel anxious, is like you don't know what you're about to do sometimes. You can't predict your own behavior sometimes. Anyway, that's his dispute with those who hold strong determination. It's you are inauthentic, insincere. You don't believe it. It's a logical trick. It means nothing. People who hold that they're predetermined don't consciously and sincerely act that way, etc. So Buddhism walks a line between that. They say, obviously, we're very conditioned, and you can try it by changing your nature, but we don't feel there is any great value to proclaim that you're rigidly predetermined. Yeah. So we have come to the end of our session here, and if I know myself, I think this is the end of it for this week. You never know. So welcome back, everybody. We will theoretically be here next week, unless I change my mind. And I don't know I'm going to. Okay. So long for now.